Alright, today I wanted to talk about the Highpoint SSD7105. If you have not heard of this, I would not hold that against you. These are fairly niche products. Highpoint itself is a fairly niche supplier overall, but they do have a couple of very cool products, again, on kind of the fringe, very far out there edge devices. So the one that we're looking at here that I've got configured in the server is going to be that Highpoint SSD7105. What this is a PCIe 3.0 RAID controller. So most of the time, everybody's going to tell you you do not need and you do not want a RAID controller, which is for the most part relatively valid. There are still some cases where they make sense, and this is going to be one of those. So normally when you have an NVMe drive, you just plug that in and you're good to go. For older systems, especially one as old as this HPE DL580 G9, you're going to be looking at the inability to bifurcate slots. So I have a ton of PCIe 3.0 connectivity, but if I was to put a NVMe drive in one of those, the issue would arise that it only will see one. So I would lose an entire 16 lanes for one 4X drive. So it would only use 4 lanes out of the 16, therefore, reducing the capability. Where this Highpoint drive comes in is that it has a built-in RAID functionality. So instead of bifurcating, we're going to present the entire thing as a RAID adapter. And you'll see this NVMe controller here. This is the one that we're talking about. And the reason I kind of wanted to make this video is, one, there's not a lot of information out there on these at all. And then the second is that the setup process was incredibly painful. So the Highpoint Technologies website is decent. I would not say it's great. My biggest gripe with the Highpoint website is that there's a ton of data out there, but none of it is well organized. So you'll spend a lot of time going through, looking for things, trying to find what is applicable to what you're trying to do, etc., etc. And what I found was, when I first plugged this drive in, my goal was to build the array, migrate all of my data over to it, and then set that up as the primary boot device. So when I did that, I plugged it in, booted up into Windows like I normally would. I assigned all the drivers, created the RAID array, copied all the data over. Everything looked amazing, right? And then I go to reboot and boot from that new disk that I just made. Unfortunately, instead of showing what you see here where it says NVMe controller, what it showed was just all 4 disks, which I found very weird. So after a lot of digging and emailing tech support, who was completely they got stuck on one particular aspect of the fact that I booted it into Windows and created the array there. They would not let that go, despite my repeated assertions that this was not the root cause. The cause is I'm seeing 4 drives in the BIOS. It was going to do that irregardless of whether or not I had built the array in Windows. So after a lot of fumbling around, I went back through their first time setup guide, just getting ready to nuke everything, and it has you create a USB drive that you'll boot from. It's got to be FAT32. So it does have a file size limitation on it. You're going to put a small series of files on there and create it via Rufus. And so once I did that, I got in there. It's all the exact same settings. It's trying to get you to build the array. And then I was just going through and plugging in through the help command, trying to find exactly what I was looking for. And I found an option in there to update the firmware. I said, well, why not? So I update the firmware, and bing, we're off to the races. Everything pulls in. It shows up as 1 disk instead of 4 individual disks. And the array that I had originally created in Windows, still there, still functional. The only thing to keep in mind is when you're building those arrays from a software like Macrom or any of the others, you are going to have to go back through and do a repair for the boot. But once you do, it will come up and boot. So I will take a quick pause here. We will get it booted, and then we will show you what we're looking at on the inside. All right, and we are back and booted here. So I'm going to show a couple of things real quick on the storage performance and a couple of gotchas inside the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise configuration. So what we have here first, I'm going to bring this one up and just kind of highlight it here. So this one, the C drive here, is going to be our RAID 4 of NVMe drives. This one is a little bit skewed because the backup decided to run during this process, so numbers are a little bit lower than they're supposed to be. I still don't see the possibility of hitting the claimed read and write speeds that the Highpoint team makes. They're showing a theoretical maximum of 14 rather than so 14,000 rather than 8,000 that I see on average. But that would be in a more than ideal scenario for them. But what we are going to highlight here, so this one next to it here, this is the D drive. And so this is 5 SATA SSDs in RAID 0. And you can see the massive performance difference in between these two. So with the RAID 5, you're looking at just under 3,000, whereas on the NVMe drives, you're looking at closer to 8,000. The other part that really stands out is going to be the random 4Ks. Those are just night and day difference. So what does this mean for a day in, day out usage? A lot of people would say, well, it boots faster. It technically does boot faster, but the post time on this server drastically dwarfs any boot time into Windows or any other application for that matter. So this is really more for what you're doing inside the server itself. And where I have found this to be incredibly useful is loading and unloading very, very large language models into and out of the system. So, and that's going to be my third one here. So this is going to be the one labeled A. So A is actually a network storage device. You probably wouldn't think that when you're first looking at these numbers, because we are in some places exceeding the local RAID 0 storage. But no, this is actually over the network. You're looking at 30 gigabits of data being pushed to and from in a sequential manner, which is pretty darn incredible. And this could go higher if I did some more optimization and some other things like that. But the key aspect here is in between a couple of these, I can move large language models around very easily. These language models can be hundreds of gigabytes in size, so being able to very easily move stuff in and out is a large plus for me. So let's go and talk about one more thing that did catch me off guard. So the whole reason I built that NVMe RAID was because I was having so much trouble with the built-in RAID 0. I would routinely come and find that Task Manager is just pegged out at 100% disk utilization, and it's just crawling. Well, the reason for that is the HP Enterprise Smart Storage Controller was crippling the drive. So there are a couple of different storage controller software out there. Make sure you're getting the one that says Smart Storage Administrator. This is the newer version. There is an older one that when you load it up, it just errors out. Took me a very long time to figure that out because this server sits on the edge where they rolled from one to the other. So you can find some documentation that's still pointing to the old one. You definitely want this one. You go ahead and run that as client, and that will bring this guy up here. Actually, I'll leave that up there for now. And the primary one that we want to do is modify controller settings. And we want to physical drive write cache state is enabled. So what that does is when you're working with your drives, it assumes that it's taking over the caching priority for the drive, which on the mechanical hard drives, that works fairly well. It actually is surprisingly coherent system. So it makes sense there. Where it does not make sense is in the SSD realm, because this server has a tiny amount of cache on it. I want to say it's like 1 gig if I remember correctly. No, I'm sorry, 2 gigs with a little less than that available for doing cache. And so the other one that you want to make sure that we're doing here is we're enabling cache on both of those. And this allows for much better performance. Again, night and day performance difference. We brought the logical drive out from the gutter where I was getting maybe 100 up and down to what you were seeing there, where we're getting much closer to the 3,000 mark rather than the hundreds, which was just again, the whole system would just chug at those speeds. But now with these enabled, you can get pretty darn good performance. The other thing I will call out here is that I am testing at 8 gigs in size. This prevents the system from using, from falsely showing how fast it can go if you're doing really small writes. If you're under that, 1.5 gig mark, you can get really fast numbers, like shockingly fast numbers if you're willing to, again, for small stuff that's just kind of in and out, you can hit just the cache in there where it's receiving and then pumping that right back out to you. It will give you insane metrics. Now, again, we're looking for really, really small benefits to doing that. So generally, you're going to see that in your day-to-day usage where you're getting, little small burst files here and there. And those work really well. You can see here we're at almost 7,000 on that one. So let me just go ahead and stop that. No reason to keep running it. So again, there are optimizations and tunings that you can do with the Hewlett-Packard there. Overall, it works really well. The driver package from Highpoint does work. I had no issues there. Their little UI to build out the RAID array also works really well. The only gotcha, again, was going to be the firmware. Gotta make sure that firmware is updated, at least on this platform. I don't know for other platforms, but for my platform with the HPE ProLiant Gen 9 DL580, it had to have that firmware update to be able to see the drives correctly inside the BIOS. So I believe that is all I'm going to cover today. Again, just kind of a brief overview of the application and usage for the Highpoint SSD7105. Again, didn't really see a lot of documentation out there. I'll put this out if people are interested and they want to see a deeper dive into it. I may do that at a later point, but we'll see. Again, this is a fairly niche product, so I'm not anticipating a lot of uptake on this one.